The wind carried more than dust that evening. It carried silence, the kind that falls after cruelty has had its say, heavy, wordless, and waiting. The kind of silence that doesn't beg to be broken but lingers like smoke around the edges of a soul. The wagon creaked down the empty trail, its wheels tired, its driver disinterested. She lay in the back, a girl of 26, barely breathing beneath a blanket stiff with dried blood. Her dress, once pale orange and simple, was torn at the hem and stained dark at the knees. Her legs were splinted with makeshift sticks bound in old leather belts. One of them was broken clean through. The other, worse. She hadn't screamed when it happened. Screaming had never made anything stop. The man didn't say goodbye when he dropped her off. Just kicked the side of the wagon and muttered something like, "She's yours now, world." The wagon turned back toward the hills, disappearing into the flat light of dusk. And she was left on the dusty edge of a town that didn't want her. No one helped her down. She crawled. Dragged herself by her elbows onto the hard-packed earth, every inch earned through gritted teeth and fading will. By the time she reached the wooden post near the saloon porch, her breath came shallow and strange. Like a bird trying not to sing. People stared. They always did. One boy, no older than 10, threw a rock that struck her hip. His mother didn't stop him. She only tugged his hand tighter and said, "Don't look at her. She's ruined." She didn't cry. Not then. She'd stopped crying some weeks ago, back when they laughed as they broke her legs. The laughter hurt more than the snapping. Men shouldn't laugh like that, like children with dead butterflies in their hands. They hadn't even called her by her name. Just the wife. Just her. By nightfall, the town forgot her. Lamps flickered behind drawn curtains. The saloon sang drunken lullabies to itself. The stars blinked overhead, confused at what they saw. She lay alone against the post, legs folded awkwardly beneath her, breathing through the pain like it was an old friend sitting beside her. Her skin burned with sun and bruises. Her black hair clung to her face in clumps of sweat and sand. She thought she might sleep. Or fade. Or simply slip through the crack between night and nothing. But then, softly, without meaning to, she whispered into the dirt. "They broke my legs for fun." Not a story. Not a complaint. Just the truth. And somewhere across the way, someone heard it. Not with ears. Not with pity. But with the part of the heart that stays quiet most of a man's life. The part that recognizes pain by the way it's been buried. He watched her from the far end of the street, standing still beside his horse, his hat low over his brow. He had come into town for nails and coffee. He hadn't planned to bring home anything more. But life doesn't ask permission to change. He didn't go to her. Not yet. Didn't rush in with saving hands or questions. Just watched. As if trying to remember her. As if she'd stepped out of some half-dream he couldn't name. In the barn that night, a horse shifted its weight and snorted. Its ears perked to the sound of footsteps. The man entered slowly, carrying a bundle wrapped in wool. He knelt beside an old cot and laid the bundle down like it was glass. Inside it, the girl barely stirred. Her breathing was shallow. But her fists were unclenched. Her lips, cracked and trembling, moved without sound. He sat beside her on a wooden stool and watched the snow begin to fall through the cracks in the roof. She slept. In the morning, she woke to the scent of hay and wood smoke. Her legs still ached, deep and sharp, like thorns in the marrow. But she was warm. That was new. A woolen blanket covered her shoulders. Beneath it, fresh bandages had replaced the leather belts. The splints were smoother now, shaped with care, held by cotton wraps soaked in something that smelled of wintergreen and honey. She turned her head and saw him. Sitting near the far wall, feeding a small stove with pine wood, was the man. Mid-30s, maybe. Worn face, kind eyes, hands that knew how to mend fences and break horses but never broke anything that couldn't be unbroken. He didn't speak first. Neither did she. That silence, it wasn't empty. It was respectful. Like a room made for mourning, or a church made for breath. He poured tea into a tin cup and set it beside her. Steam curled upward, soft as smoke from a prayer. "Finally," she said. "Why'd you bring me here?" His voice was low, almost too quiet to catch. "Didn't see where else you belonged." She didn't answer. Because deep down, she knew he didn't mean she belonged in his barn. He meant she didn't belong in the dirt. By late afternoon, he'd carried her inside the house. A one-room cabin built with careful hands. There were quilts folded neatly on the shelf. A worn Bible on the table. A photograph nailed to the wall, 2 boys and a mother long gone. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. Names weren't needed yet. Just food. And time. And silence that didn't demand anything. She learned he cooked well enough. That he didn't own a dog. That he spoke to his horses like people. That he made 2 cups of coffee each morning, even before she came. 1 for him. 1 for the ghosts, maybe. He learned she liked the fire burning low. That she slept better with the window cracked. That she sometimes cried in her sleep but never wept when awake. On the third night, she said, "I thought I'd die out there. Didn't think anyone care." He didn't look up from the table. "You were wrong." She didn't know how to hold that answer. It didn't fit inside her. Not yet. But it stayed. Like a seed in frozen ground. Outside, the snow began to settle, soft and slow. Inside, she took another sip of the tea and let it warm her from the throat down. The pain would stay for a while. So would the scars. But she was off the street now. She was seen. And somewhere deep within the folds of her silence, something began to breathe again. Not forgiveness. Not love. But the first thread of something that didn't have to hurt. And far off in the quiet of that wintering world, the fire crackled, not to warm the house, but to say gently, "This isn't the end." The ranch sat 2 miles west of town, past the dry riverbed and the lone cottonwood that leaned like it was listening to something underground. No sign marked its boundary. Just split-rail fencing, a few quiet horses, and a house that didn't boast its presence. It had the look of something built more for staying than showing, like its owner. He rose before first light, as he always had. Not from alarm or obligation, but from habit. The kind of habit that fills the bones when you live long enough alone. He washed his face in the basin by the window and lit the stove with practiced hands. The wood crackled like old parchment. The fire touched nothing it wasn't meant to. It was honest flame, like him. She hadn't stirred all night. He checked twice. Once just before midnight when the wind picked up, and once again just as the first color touched the hills. Her breath was steady, shallow. Her face softened in sleep, but her body curled like it still remembered pain. Memory lived in the limbs long after bruises faded. He left a cup of tea on the side table, then headed out to feed the horses. The barn smelled of hay, saddle oil, and frost. Familiar smells. He didn't hurry. A man who works with animals learns early that rushing breaks more than it mends. By the time he came back in, she was awake. She didn't speak, just watched him. There was something guarded in her eyes, not distrust, not yet, but the deep, sharp caution of someone who'd seen kindness cost more than cruelty. He didn't try to coax words from her. He'd known enough silence in his life to recognize it when it asked to be left alone. The table was small. The 2 chairs matched only in wood. He sat and handed her a plate with a heel of bread, buttered and warm. She took it, fingers shaking slightly. He waited for her to eat. Not because he needed to see it, but because it felt wrong to start before her. When she bit into the bread, her jaw worked slowly, like each chew was its own decision. She swallowed with difficulty and set the rest down. "They said I was slow," she murmured, not quite looking at him. "Said I took too long to cry. Like something was wrong with me." He didn't interrupt. Her voice was thin, but it held. "They called it stubbornness. I just didn't know how to be loud about hurt. Guess they got tired of waiting." The cup in his hand cooled. "You don't have to be loud here." He said it like he was telling her the time of day. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the cabin walls. He took the cup from her hands and refilled it without asking. When he returned it, she met his eyes for the first time. No gratitude. No pleading. Just a quiet sort of acknowledgement, like 2 survivors nodding at the same battlefield from different sides. Her name came days later. Not because he asked. But because she said it while looking at the fire, voice barely audible. She spoke it like it was someone she used to know. Like it had once belonged to a girl who ran through fields barefoot, long before bones were cracked on wooden floors. He repeated it once. Not loudly. Not with weight. Just enough to show he'd heard. She slept most days at first. Her body, weak from weeks of pain, needed more than warmth. It needed permission to stop bracing. He made broths and stews, nothing fancy. He brought a book once, an old one with faded pages and someone else's initials on the inside cover. He placed it near her cot and didn't mention it again. One morning, she picked it up. Flipped to a page at random. Her fingers traced the words like they were more real than the walls around her. That night, he read aloud. His voice wasn't pretty. But it was steady. She didn't smile. But she stayed awake to listen. Time stretched soft between them, not rushed, not delayed. Just honest. Days grew colder. He sealed the windows with thick cloth and mended her splints with smoother wood. When he had to lift her to adjust the bedding, he did so gently, always waiting for her nod. Never moving faster than she allowed. She noticed that. The patience. The respect. It unnerved her at first, because no one had ever waited on her comfort before. But slowly, that quiet attention began to sow something into the hollow places, not trust, not yet, but a question. What if not all men meant to break? One evening, as the first snowfall drifted down in slow spirals, she asked him about the photograph. He looked over at it. "My brother," he said. "Long time gone now. We grew up here. Mama too, till the sickness came. She waited. He didn't say more. She didn't push. But later, when she was falling asleep, she whispered, "Did he treat you kind?" He looked at her from his place near the fire. His face didn't change. "No. But he was the only one I had." She nodded once and turned away, as if she understood more than she said. The days grew colder. Her legs, though still weak, had begun to respond, slow twitches beneath the quilts, a dull ache instead of sharp torment. He started helping her sit up longer. Carried her outside once, bundled in blankets, so she could feel the sun again. It startled her how bright it still was. "There's life out here," she said. He nodded. "Always has been." A pause. Then, almost afraid. "Even for me?" He didn't look at her. Just pointed to the cottonwood tree out front. "Even that tree still blooms come spring. Bent near sideways, but it keeps coming back." They watched it together for a while. That night, she didn't cry in her sleep. A week later, a letter arrived, dust-covered and folded sharp at the corners. He read it without expression, folded it again, and placed it in the drawer. She saw the tension in his jaw. Didn't ask. But she noticed. Later, when he brought her tea, she said, "You're kind. That's hard in a man." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm just tired of being the kind that looks away." The fire flickered low. Her hands, once so stiff, now cradled the cup with surprising steadiness. There was still a road to walk between them. Her legs would need time. Her heart, more still. But he had not asked for anything. Had not expected her to be anyone but exactly as she was. In that house, she found no demands. Just small acts repeated daily. Bread. Quiet. Patience. Eyes that didn't flinch when she looked back. The kind of safety that doesn't knock but waits by the door. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, she took another sip of tea and said softly, to no one in particular, "I think I could learn to be loud. Not the cruel kind, but the kind that says I'm here." He didn't smile. But he poured more tea into her cup. And in the hush of that moment, something shifted. Not a promise. Not a vow. But the beginning of something still unnamed, blooming quiet and slow, like the way light gathers before the sun decides to rise. Snow fell like hush. Not the frantic kind that blurs the world, but the slow drifting sort that blankets silence in silence. Outside the cabin, the land lay wrapped in white, fence posts softened, horse tracks faded, and the cottonwood tree stood bowed beneath the weight of winter, as if deep in prayer. Inside, the warmth came not just from the fire, but from the rhythm two people had quietly carved into the cold. She could sit up on her own now. For longer stretches. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer screamed. It whispered, low and dull, like an old wound asking only to be remembered. Her legs, though still braced, bore some of her weight when she shifted. He had fashioned a cane for her from polished ash, carved with patient hands, not as a gift, but as a gesture. She had run her fingers over its handle and nodded once. That was enough. Their days had become a gentle procession of shared silences, steady routines, and the slow unfolding of things unsaid. He rose before the sun, fed the horses, lit the fire, brewed coffee. She woke to the scent of bread baking or pine burning, to his soft movements and the way he always left her cup closer to the fire to keep it warm. Some days, he read to her again. His voice remained gravel-rough, like a road left untended, but it carried tenderness in every syllable. She followed with her eyes, her hands resting quietly in her lap, stitching or twisting yarn between her fingers as he spoke. The words didn't matter so much as the presence, the steady pulse of someone staying near without needing to fix, prove, or possess. Once, while the fire popped low and lazy, she whispered, "When I was little, I used to sing to the chickens." He looked up. "I'd sit in the dirt with my knees all scraped and hum made-up songs. Thought maybe I could teach them to be less afraid of foxes." He smiled, just barely. "Did it work? They still got eaten." She shrugged. "But I think they liked the company." He didn't laugh, just nodded like he understood something deeper in her words. Maybe he did. She watched him one morning as he mended a saddle strap, his fingers calloused but precise. There was something in the way he moved, nothing wasted, nothing loud. It made her think of rivers that shape canyons not by force, but by persistence. She wondered if he had always been this way, or if life had made him quiet to survive it. He caught her looking, but didn't comment. Instead, he handed her the leather scrap, let her feel the worn texture, let her understand his world by touch. It was the first time she smiled without effort. Later that night, she stood on her own for 4 full breaths before the pain folded her back into the chair. He had watched without rushing to help, only stepping forward when she reached for the cane. She was grateful he let her try without flinching at her failure. "For breaths longer than yesterday," he said simply. That evening, they sat by the fire without words. She rested her head back against the chair, her body tired but humming quietly from small triumphs. He stirred the coals. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You ever wonder why some folks only know how to take?" She didn't answer right away. "I think, maybe no one ever taught them how to hold things without squeezing too hard." He turned that over in his mind. The firelight caught the side of his face, the strong line of his jaw, the creases near his eyes, not from smiling, but from squinting into sun and wind for years. "I never had a teacher for kindness either," he said. "But I figured I'd rather learn slow than forget entirely." She watched him for a long while. "You're learning fine." They didn't speak more that night, but the quiet between them shifted, not fuller, just warmer. One afternoon, the cane slipped from her grip and clattered across the floor. She cursed softly and froze, expecting him to rush forward. He didn't. Instead, he waited, watched as she scooted forward, reached awkwardly, pulled the cane back to her side. When she finally sat upright again, out of breath but victorious, he passed her a mug of water. No applause. No pity. Just presence. She met his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." He looked confused. "For what?" "For not helping." He gave a small, sad smile. "You're the kind of strong that makes others forget you're hurting." She looked at the fire. "Or makes them want to break you more." "Not me," he said. And she believed him. Another week passed. Her steps grew steadier. She made the walk to the porch by herself, leaning hard on the cane but upright. The air was cold, sharp in the lungs, but the sky was wide and clean and blue like a promise someone might dare to keep. She looked out toward the hills, toward the place where the town slept, unaware of her rising. "They don't know I'm still alive. Does that matter?" She thought on that. It used to. Now. "I think I just want to matter to one person. The right way." He didn't answer. Just leaned beside her against the porch beam. Two shadows stretching side by side in the pale winter light. That night, while the wind curled around the cabin like a blanket drawn close, she told him about the child. Her voice was small. "I was with child once. Didn't tell anyone for weeks. Thought maybe I'd get to keep one joy for myself." He didn't move. Just listened. It didn't make it. Too much cold. Too much hunger. "And after, they said it was my fault." His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. They buried the little box without a name. Just a cross. Like it was nothing. She folded her hands in her lap, knuckles pale. "I haven't said that out loud in 3 winters." The room was still. He reached out, slow and certain, and placed his hand gently over hers. Not pressing. Not claiming. Just saying, "I hear you." She didn't pull away. And for the first time, her eyes filled, not from pain, but from the ache of being seen without being judged. The fire hissed quietly, like it understood the gravity of silence after truth. And then, almost as if the air had shifted its breath, she asked, "Why haven't you asked me to stay?" He didn't meet her gaze. "Because you haven't healed enough to choose yet." Her breath caught. He stood, stoked the fire, then turned back to her. "When you can walk past the tree without needing to lean, ask me again." She said nothing. Just nodded. But as she watched the snow melt on the windowsill and her cane resting near the door, a new kind of strength settled inside her. Not the strength to survive. But the strength to decide. And though she did not say it aloud, she knew. Spring was coming. And with it, a woman no longer afraid to take up space in the world again. She would not return to the dust. Not ever. The thaw came slow. Ice melted in quiet rivulets along the cabin's roofline, dripping into mud that clung to boots and tires and memory alike. The land began to breathe again, brittle stalks breaking through frost, the cottonwood straightening by inches as if unbowing to the sky. She walked without the cane now. Not far, not fast, but sure. Her steps were careful, her balance imperfect, yet each footfall carried the kind of triumph no shout could name. Her legs bore weight that once shattered them. Her hands opened doors she used to only watch others pass through. He noticed but didn't speak of it. He'd learned that some victories are better left to bloom quietly inside the one who earned them. They ate dinner at the table now. Across from each other. No longer out of necessity, but as a rhythm they'd come to trust. She had begun to hum again, faint melodies under her breath while stirring stew or folding linen, tunes she didn't remember learning but had carried inside her all along, like seeds waiting for warmth. He fixed the roof. Repaired the gate. He'd made space for her, slowly, wordlessly, without ever naming what that space meant. And she had filled it not with promises or apologies, but with presence. Then one morning, the birds came back. Not just one, but dozens, darting through the low clouds, lighting up branches like sparks on dry twigs. She stood on the porch, her shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes squinting against the light. "They always come back," she whispered. "Even after the world tries to freeze them out." He joined her, arms crossed loosely, gaze on the ridge beyond the valley. Some things find their way home. But not all things return gentle. They came on a day like any other. No storm. No warning. Just the sound of hooves on thawed earth and the slow rise of dust behind riders. She saw them first. Her breath caught. Her spine straightened. He stepped beside her, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. 3 men. Broad-shouldered, wide-stanced, carrying the kind of ease that only belongs to the cruel or the foolish. Their clothes were cleaner than the road should have allowed. Their eyes, those were familiar. Her blood turned cold. Not from fear, but memory. The first man, the one who dismounted with a smirk and no greeting, was the same who had left her to die on the edge of town. His hair was grayer now. His voice hadn't changed. "Well, I'll be. Look who's walkin'. Thought you'd be bones by now." She didn't answer. She stepped down from the porch, slowly, no cane, no trembling. "I'm not yours anymore," she said, voice steady as rain on tin. He chuckled. "Ain't how the law sees it." "There ain't a law out here worth trusting," came another voice, his. The rancher had stepped down beside her. No weapons drawn. No threats made. Just his presence, like stone beneath river water, unmoved. The second man, younger, meaner in the mouth, spat near the step. "She was given to us. Paid for. You think playing house out here makes her clean again?" Her voice didn't shake. "I was never yours to buy. You're damaged goods. Then why ride all this way?" The silence that followed cracked like thunder. The third man shifted in his saddle. The nervous one. Always following, never leading. "She ain't worth it," he muttered. The first man sneered. "She knows things. Things we don't need getting out. You think people forget what women like her carry?" She took a step forward. "I carried a child you buried. I carried bruises no one asked about. I carried silence longer than you could hold breath. And now, I carry myself." The rancher's hand hovered near his side. Not on a gun. On his belt. Just enough to say I can, if I must. But it was her who ended it. "You break what you fear. But I ain't afraid of you no more." The first man stepped forward, rage blooming. And then, the rancher moved. One step. One hand raised. No strike thrown. No violence needed. Just stillness so firm it made the men rethink everything they thought power meant. The moment held. Then passed. The leader snorted, spat again. "You'll regret not crawling back." But they turned. And this time, she didn't watch them go with dread. She watched with clarity. She stood tall, unshaking, while their dust faded into distance. Inside, she sat at the table, fingers curled around a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. He brought wood to the fire, didn't speak for a long time. Then, from the quiet, she said, "I thought I'd crumble." "You didn't. I thought I'd ask you to chase them off. You didn't need me to." She turned toward him. Her eyes full, not with tears, but something steadier. "I need you for other things." He paused, hand still resting on the hearth. "Like what?" She swallowed, then smiled softly. "Like holding space when the world gets loud." He nodded. That was a kind of need he understood. That night, she walked the length of the cabin 3 times without pause. Then once more, just for herself. No cane. No leaning. He watched. Said nothing. But when she stopped near the window and looked back, he held out his hand. She took it. No urgency. No fear. Just the quiet agreement of 2 people who'd learned each other by degrees, who'd seen one another not at their best, but at their most human. Outside, the birds still sang. Inside, the fire burned low. And in the space between, a woman once discarded now stood wholly returned, not to who she was, but to who she chose to become. He pulled her close. "You walked past the tree." "I did. Still want to ask?" She nodded. "Will you keep a chair beside yours?" He kissed her forehead. "It was never just mine." And somewhere in the soft hush of nightfall, with nothing more than hands holding hands, the world offered up a truth that needed no telling. Some things break. Some things return. But the bravest things are the ones that grow again anyway. Dear friends, subscribe, like, and comment, and tell me where you're from.